Sorry.
I need to put on my glasses. She has a white piece of paper back there. I have no idea what it says. Showing my age. So with that contingent going away, we've got to use the due diligence piece. And so we're going to walk through each and everything. I had a handout here, and those for you who are watching online, what we're doing is going through the North Carolina Realtor Association update piece by piece so we can break it apart, ask questions, and make sure everyone's seen it that's here and that's online. With the contingency piece, as you look at it, we had to make changes to the offer to purchase. And when you make changes to the offer to purchase, you've also got the vacant land and the new construction piece. And so we'll look at the changes on the offer to purchase contract and know that they also coincide with identical changes on the vacant land and the new construction piece. We'll then go into buyer possession before closing agreement and the seller possession after closing agreement. There is an addition next, they're at the back. You guys will pass one up. I think we have some extra handouts back there. The vacation rental addendum, I know not a lot of us in Charlotte do it, but we have offices across the Carolinas that do have the vacation rental component. And then we'll talk about the real estate closing information form kind of quickly. And as a result, there were a number of changes also to clarify some pieces in our listing documents, our buying documents for buyer agencies, as well as all of the right to terminate. And I know I get a ton of questions all the time as to what form do I use to terminate? Where do I? So we'll walk through that just a little bit as we look at that form. We'll just do a refresher of what's on it, because I know all of us just kind of freak out of even thinking about having to use a termination form because no one really wants an offer to terminate. But we need to be clear on when someone can use a form and why. So we'll go through that. And then we'll just touch bases on a few other housekeeping things. One of the things that I noted out there that I was laughing at, that I thought I'd pop in just to pop in, is this piece on notices. So North Carolina always puts out something, and what is your thought on if one of your friends or someone says, hey, can I use one of your forms, or do you have a copy of a form? Do you ever hand it out or share it with anyone?
No.
No.
That's good. Have a couple of agents who've asked me that recently, so I thought I would just mention it before we get started. North Carolina forms aren't meant to share. They're only for our affiliates and members of our association. So if you have a friend who's doing a for sale by owner, God forbid, or you have someone who says, hey, can I take a look at those forms? There are sample forms at the North Carolina Realtor Association that you can utilize to share samples, but you don't want to just pass along a copy of any of our forms because it's not proper to, and you could be called out for it if that form gets passed along and they know it came from you. A lot of times our signature information and stuff are on the bottom of those forms, so be careful about that. Just thought I'd mention that. So as we get started, we're going to go into the contingent sale addendum. I've talked about it, and really the key is the Joint Task Force really thought that after careful consideration, we're getting rid of it. We're focusing on the 2011 due diligence piece and that how it's tied into the contract now. And basically, if we go down to the offer to purchase, and we start looking at pieces, the due diligence piece really pops right into play down here. Okay, I guess mine decided not to pop up. Give me a second, and I will go over to it. I think we have a little lag on our feed here because that all of these pulled up so where we easily pop into them. So I'm going to switch over to my forms. While we're waiting for that, let's just go back and talk about the other changes on the offer to purchase, because It should appear in a second as soon as our internet catches up with us. So one of the things that had been happening is when earnest money had not been included or was zero, and you can't have a contract with zero earnest money, when it came down to someone canceling and looking at liquidated damages, there was some debate and information and some precedent set with the lawyer filing a claim saying that basically earnest money deposit wasn't there, and so there could be a bigger, broader section. And so what they did here in the language on E is they focused on saying the payment of the earnest money deposit to seller and the retention of any due diligence fee by seller without regard to their respective amounts, including zero, together shall serve as liquidated damages. And so then they took out the piece down here where we've got it blocked out. A seller's right to retain the due diligence fee is blocked out. And then it says it is acknowledged by the parties that the amount of liquidated damages. So they took out payment of earnest money deposit to seller in the event of a breach of this contract by buyer. What they're trying to do is make sure that they're not opening up a can of legal worms, and they're tying back into here, regardless if it's zero or not, this is what you've got, because there was starting to be some litigation around it. So that's the only reason this was tightened up. Does anyone have any questions about that? Hold on. Can you hear me now? Wilmington, can you hear me now? I'm sorry, we're going to have to go back and forth a little bit with technology of making sure.
Can you just repeat a little bit of that? I'm not sure I totally.
Okay, so
and just kind of recap it.
Okay, so in the past, it's basically said that liquidated damages was earnest money. What they're doing, and due diligence fee, but what they're doing is saying, even if there's zero, that's still what you've got. You can't go after more.
So with the due diligence, the earnest money deposit, if they backed out, was refunded. The due diligence was not on a contingent sale.
Right. So on the contingent sale, the due diligence has not been something that would be given back, but this is in general. I was popping back up because for some reason the internet got slow and all the information that I had all of a sudden froze for a second. So I was popping back up and talking about liquidated damages because that is part of it.
Right.
But regardless of whether it's contingency or not, if there's a breach of contract, what's happening here and defining it for earnest money deposit is saying that even if the earnest money deposit is zero, that's still okay.
Okay.
From a liquidated damages standpoint. And there had been litigation started, and what the ABA and the association wanted to do is quash that type of litigation and say, whatever you decide is earnest money is earnest money. Whatever you decide is due diligence is due diligence. Just because you chose zero doesn't mean that you can go back out and ask for something different now.
You can try to get, a month of mortgage payments or
Right.
whatever.
And they're saying that's it, though, that's all that you can go after?
Yes, it says,
Just making sure. That's
yes.
what I thought you were saying. Yeah.
Right after that liquidated damages here, it says, and as seller's sole and exclusive remedy for such breach. So that's it.
Thank you.
So that is one of the updates in our document. That's in 1E. We are going to go down to 4C now. Any other questions?
Tiffany, real quick on the form, so we really can't give investor clients a copy of the lease agreement either?
You need to go to the North Carolina Realtor Association and their samples, and I'll see if we can take it as an office and put it out on Wolf Connect or somewhere where we can easily access samples, because you want to give samples, and there have the sample kind of in the background on them as opposed to the actual copy.
So then they have to figure out their own lease.
Yes, if you are not representing someone and helping them with the lease, they need to either come up with their own lease or they need to take the sample and look at it. But you're not to be giving them forms that the North Carolina Realtor Association created in conjunction with the Bar Association. Any other questions before we move on and really get into the contingent sale addendum and the elimination of it and what to do today if you have a contingency? So as we move on, we're going to go down to 4C now. And can everyone see in the format that I have here?
So these are all updated in zip forms already?
Yes, they're all updated in zip forms.
When was the date on that we was required to use all these forms by?
You're required to use forms by the end of August.
End of August?
Yes, so come September 1st, you need to be using all of the new forms. And I'll go ahead and show you, if you go into zip forms, you can see they're all labeled as old, and then you have the new ones popping down below. So they put everything old up above if you still need something to tie into a contract that is an old contract, but the newer stuff is going to be at the bottom. So the new offer to purchase and contract, if we go to 4C, if this will load, I have this perfectly set up for you guys. Can you read this? So 4C is right here, and sell and lease of existing property. And so basically it's saying, as a result, they basically made a new recommendation that you should not close until the end of the due diligence period.
So you take the due diligence period right up until closing?
You do not take the due diligence period right up to closing. When you are considering this, you need to make sure that your buyer will feel confident that by the end of due diligence period, that they can close on the other property. The main difference here is that the contingent sale addendum allowed them to get their earnest money back through closing. Now they're not. So they're going to have a little more skin in the game between the due diligence end period and the closing date. So they need to make sure they're dotting their I's, crossing their T's, and
I
confident.
always thought that was a really good deal for a buyer, somebody who accepted that.
It's a great deal, and a lot of times over the last few years, sellers haven't really been inclined to accept a contingency, and we've been using due diligence. So some of us haven't used a contingent addendum form in a long time, and instead have used the due diligence addendum to guide that process. How many people have used the contingency addendum in the last year? So as we go down to 4C, let me show you here. I don't know why I did not like this one. It basically says sell or lease of existing property. And it says, as noted in 5B, unless otherwise provided in an addendum, the contract is not conditioned upon the sale or lease or closing of other property owned by buyer. Therefore, if buyer must sell or lease other real property in order to qualify for a new loan or to otherwise complete the purchase of the property, buyer shall seek to close on buyer's other property prior to the end of the due diligence period or be reasonably satisfied that closing on buyer's other property will take place prior to the settlement date of this contract.
How are they gonna know that?
They're gonna have
They're
to,
gonna crystal ball, they're gonna say, oh, I feel confident about this?
Well, we put it here through
I
like
think
the diligence period.
Have
It's good.
Or appraisal, that way you at least finish one of the main hiccups, basically.
I think you're gonna be,
You're gonna have to make sure that that side's taken care of prior to the expiration.
you're gonna have to do that. But also, this is going to allow them to go under contract prior to even having their house under contract or listed. So it's basically the same debate. It's, are you willing to lose the earnest money for this house? Are you willing to gamble is kind of where we're putting our buyers in that position. But we also have newer programs like the Ribbon program that we can supplement if someone doesn't have as much of a risk tolerance. And so as realtors, we have a lot of different opportunities to suggest ideas to our clients. We just got to educate ourselves on what they can do if they want to buy and sell at the same time. And most of the time, you're timing it out so that you're hitting the right days. So now you not only need to be confident in what's happening with the lender side of things and making sure the appraisal's done and their conditions are as clear as they can be at that point, and you're giving time, you also have to think about where their due diligence period is ending and how much money, if their buyer backs out, that they have in due diligence or earnest money, because they'll be collecting that due diligence and earnest money from their buyer and paying the seller. So you've got to look at it as a balancing of what does the math look like? Are you comfortable? So you've got to do a little bit of that upfront. So it's more strategy and it's more looking at the numbers. And if they're not comfortable with it, then buying and selling at the same time might not be the right fit. Maybe a ribbon program works. Maybe it's a short-term rental, but you've got to walk them through the process and get them comfortable and confident in the sequence. And so that means having good upfront conversations with your lenders and being very comfortable if you're already under contract with someone to purchase your house or the buyer that you're bringing to the next house, that you feel confident in what they're saying from a lending standpoint. They have a strong letter, and it's not just someone you've never heard of. As a lender, as we have this chain going that says, you know, they came and gave me their income information verbally and they got a credit score, because as we know, a lot of lenders write a letter off of that. You need to have a strong application. You need to have documents into them before you're putting it out. And then you've also got to think about how far back does this chain go? And so you've got to do that due diligence and homework so you can best advise your buyers relative to the contingency, because they are going to be losing the earnest money if things fall apart in that last period between due diligence end date and closing. And it's not uncommon for it to happen today. I mean, the majority of deals I've done over the last 3 years haven't been contingency, and we've forced the buyers to do a due diligence period. And so it's happening out there in the marketplace today, even if you're not doing it. Any questions about that?
Just a comment, Tiffany, it seems if you're representing the seller and they've checked the box that they still have a home to sell, I mean, if you're the listing agent, you really, I would think going forward, if that's the case, certainly want to up the ante on the due diligence money and the earnest money.
Right. That's
going to be the battle, because everyone's going to want to protect their particular client or their side of the equation. Which means, how do you meet in the middle? What's fair? What risk tolerance does the seller have? Because they're really going to be the damaged parties if the money's not enough.
Right.
You're correct.
So when I called the commission on this, they said, get an attorney to draft an addendum that works. That's what I was told.
Right.
That's the only other way to handle this. Otherwise, they give us these provisions.
Yes. And an addendum standpoint, we as a company likely aren't going to draft an addendum that would be a broad scope that would touch everyone. But if you have a client and it clearly says in here as we go further down, relative to addendums, an attorney can still draft a contingency addendum, but you don't want to pick up an attorney who's going to draft one addendum and you're going to use it carte blanche across the board. You need to make sure that that attorney knows you're using it for this deal. And if you have another deal, that that attorney knows, because you need to write their name down as the person who drafted that document. You're not the one drafting it. And so if you're filling in the blanks and you're adding language to it, that's not going to fly if you ever get called on the carpet by the real estate commission. You need to make sure that you have an attorney drafting it and they know every time that you're utilizing it. As a company, if we start seeing issues with contingency addendum, we may well draft something or put something together. I had discussions with Karush and he said, we're not opposed to it, but we want to see kind of where things fall out, because today a lot of times the due diligence period is utilized, and if there's a necessary need for contingency addendum, we'll look at it long term if it becomes an issue with our agents. So know that's something that is up for discussion if need be. Any other questions? One question that popped up online is, do you think that this will encourage people to use possession before closing? That is a strong possibility, but I think you've got to be very careful, because if the deal is falling apart for the buyer's house sell, I don't know how confident I'm going to be to let a buyer move into my seller's house, knowing that they might have to relist and completely resell their house and go through the whole process again. So you got to weigh what makes sense for your buyer and your seller. There could be scenarios where it does make sense if there's enough money involved in giving the seller confidence. But if there's not, and we're talking about a very skimpy due diligence and a very skimpy earnest money, that's probably not going to be the best solution. Any other questions so far? So as we move down to 5A, it just, again, on the note, is basically clarifying here that we also have a new option under buyer representations for loans. How many of you have had and come into contact with a down payment assistance buyer in the last year? We have not had to disclose that previously, and there have been a lot of complaints. I've actually gone to hearings myself to help agents in our office relative to this issue. Down payment assistance can provide for additional requirements for buyers and for sellers. So not only have they had the option to mark it here in 5 as down payment assistance program, as it's now required. So if you know your client is getting it, you need to make sure it's marked here. What you don't want to happen is go through the process and all of a sudden you're using a program that no one was aware of, and now the seller has to do more repair or the buyer has to take more time in the process. Yes?
But if North Carolina is not contingent on financing, if we don't know about the down payment assistance program ahead of time, do we have to make adjustments afterwards?
I would, at the time you become aware that you're utilizing a down payment assistance, that's a material fact. You need to share it.
All parties should know in writing.
And then again, here in this note that got a lot of blue outline and red outline notes on our contract now. They added to it here at the bottom of page 5. It says buyer's obligations under this contract are not conditioned upon obtaining or closing any loan. Some mortgage loan programs and down payment assistance programs selected by buyer may impose additional repair obligations, conditions, or costs upon seller or buyer, and more information may be needed. So this is clearly defining and sharing with both sides that you need to be aware that if you have a down payment assistance or even if you have a loan, it's not contingent on closing. You need to solve that during the due diligence period. So as we go down, then 5B had some changes to it. And this is where we get into the period of what the due diligence has added relative to the contingency side of things. So as we look at this, you've got other properties here. And it says buyer does or does not have to sell or lease other real property in order to qualify for a new loan or to complete the purchase. So up front, there was that little checkbox that you checked that really, if you weren't paying attention close enough, you might not see it. Now it's clear here in 5B saying, yes, I do have another property to sell. Then it's asking for the other address. It says complete the following only if buyer does have to sell or lease other property. So you don't have to put it in if they don't have to sell it and they have a house to sell. But even if it's in the loan document saying they have to have a house to sell, even if they're under contract and you feel confident, you're still putting that information in here. Then it goes on to say, check one of these boxes. So as we look, it says buyer's other property is under contract as of the date of this offer, and a copy of the contract has either been previously provided to seller or accompanies this offer. Then it says in italics, buyer may mark out any confidential information such as purchase price and the buyer's identity prior to providing a copy of the contract to seller. Failure to provide a copy of the contract shall not prevent this offer from becoming a binding contract. However, in caps, screaming at us, seller is strongly encouraged to obtain and review the contract on buyer's property prior to accepting this offer. So one, this is telling us we shouldn't be sharing confidential information. So we should, in a sense, go ahead and be putting in there that they are not, or I should say, blocking out the purchaser's name, the purchase price, but just letting them know it's there. And when you're doing the purchaser's name is usually on multiple places. And so don't just do the top. Think about every other place where the purchaser's name might come into play on any of the documents that you're sharing, because it could be at the signature line where you have it there. So make sure you're hitting all of those points. And the purchase price, you also might want to block out the bottom line of the total of what they have remaining to bring to the closing. So think through what you're doing. Don't do it in haste, and make sure that it can't be seen. Any questions there?
I had someone bring me an offer night before last that was, they were going to be contingent, but she didn't make it say it was contingent, she said, because they had multiple offers from some iBuyers. And I was like, I don't care. Because if they don't know what they're fully in for at the end, that's pretty dicey. So we got multiple offers on our side anyway, but I just thought that to me is not a benefit if you tell me that they're not listing and the iBuyer can buy quickly, because you don't know, they don't know how much they're really gonna have to pay until they get further down the line in the
Right.
process.
It is important, as we have all of these different types of buyers coming into play these days, that we're very clear that even an iBuyer is someone that you need to document that is purchasing the house, because it's not a done deal. And you could get to the inspection process, like she says, and end up with $20,000 or $30,000, and your person, I'm not doing that to move forward. A note that Sandy has down here is that she meant buyer to sell early and close. So basically she's saying that the seller stays in the house after closing, basically possessing before, so that there's only one move. That is a possibility. There are going to be lots of different creative ways that you can come up with possession before or after closing that might help this process. But just be very careful that you don't get someone into a situation where now they're becoming a landlord and they've got to go through the eviction process to get them back out.
Contact the insurance company too.
Yes, the insurance company is actually part of the changes to the buyer possession before and after closing that we're going to talk about today. They've cleared that up a lot here. Any other questions out there? So as we go down this path here, it also says, check if applicable. Buyer's other property is not under contract as of the date of this offer. Buyer's property, check only one that follows, is listed actively, marketed by a licensed real estate broker, or will be listed with and actively marketed by a licensed real estate broker. The one thing I think they missed the ball on here is putting the date there. When is it going to be listed? Because yeah, it's going to be listed, but is it going to be 2 weeks from now, 3 weeks from now, or tomorrow? I think that's an important question that you would want to ask if you get that box checked. Then you have buyers attempting to sell, lease the buyer's property without the assistance of a licensed real estate broker. That is one that you're going to have to ask a lot of questions on, because you don't want to get your client wrapped up in a situation where someone has an overpriced house and it sits on the market and you just tied up your house. So think through all of the caveats of things that could happen based on each of these selections. Any questions so far? Any concerns? Okay. So as we move on, that basically is what is set up for the contingency in the middle of the offer to purchase. So they took away the whole contingent addendum form, and this is what they put in its place. And then the due diligence process, as usual, flows. And it's just reminding all the parties that you need to terminate by the end of due diligence if you don't want to lose your earnest money deposit. So as we move on, the next piece is 8C. And so basically it's reminding agents, because I guess there have been some questions and concerns, whose responsibility it is to have utilities on through the day of closing. And so what it did was basically say that the seller needs to have working existing utilities and identify that the seller is the one responsible for paying for those. Yes, the seller could have it on, but you can't make the buyer pay for it. So when you have foreclosures or when you have other situations where someone's moved out, it's vacant, and the utilities aren't on, this is just clarifying for all in 8C that utilities must be on and that the seller is paying for it. Any questions there? On prorations and adjustments on page 9, what changed here is they're basically reminding you that the seller is the one who's paying for the prorations for their time in the property through the day of closing. Now that seems clear to all of us, but evidently somehow this was written to where someone else had a question. And who's responsible for the proration of taxes? Well, the seller is going to pay for the taxes for the period of time they're in the house. And this is just further clarifying that. Any questions on that point? Some things that we see here, you're like, well, this seems like common sense, but as we all know, we're in such a litigious environment that they're constantly going back to clear up things where there have been issues and craziness happening out in the courts. And then the condition of property at closing. So basically, they wanted to combine these two. And as you might remember, so they took 11 and 12 and made them just 11 here. And what it is basically risk of loss. Let's say there's a fire, there is a natural disaster that hits. It reminds the seller here that the seller still is responsible for the property and that the buyer can terminate. It also reminds everyone, regardless of the situation, that any insurance proceeds or monies relative to, if the buyer continues through with the contract to closing, will go to the buyer for the repair of the home. But the buyer does still have the option to terminate. They just took 11 and 12 and put it into one grouping because people were confusing as to, well, if this happens versus this happens. So they wanted to make it in one simple location so that you could go and say, if something happens with this property, what do we need to do? We go to paragraph 11, and this is what guides us through the process. I don't know about you guys, but a few years ago, there was a tornado that ripped through our area up in 485 near the Reedy Creek area. I had a person who had moved out of her home, renovated it, and it was sitting there. And she had no idea whether it had gone through her section. She knew it had gone through her street. And she was praying the whole drive over that it wasn't her house. The house one over from her had gotten lifted up off the foundation and moved over and was in the middle of the street. And she didn't have insurance on the property.
Oh, my.
And we were closing the next day. And so can you imagine if we did have insurance and that house had been moved? So there are things that happen. And down in Wilmington, think about all of the closings that were scheduled when the hurricane flew through there last year, or in the middle part of the state when all the flooding happened. So these things do happen, and I know it's not something we see a lot here in Charlotte, but it's something to just be thinking about and know that there's a place in the contract that explains what you do in that situation. And the buyer can decide to terminate, but they also can decide to stick with the contract and they get whatever insurance proceeds come from.
That's if the lender still wants to proceed, right?
Yes, that is if the lender will, because it could be in a condition where it delays closing or the lender decides they're not going to lend on it. So it depends on how severe the issue is. Any questions there? So we pretty much hit all of the points in the offer to purchase now. I'm not going to bore you in going through the exact same thing on the vacant lots, but remember we do have a vacant lot and land purchase agreement, and so all of what we just went through is also there. And as you scroll through to the next page, we also have a new construction. So if you're working with a small builder that uses the offer to purchase for North Carolina, the new construction piece also has these items in it as well. So just make sure you're using the right forms as well. So land, new construction, offer to purchase, you've got all three, and you need to make sure you're using the right form for the right occasion. Buyer possession before closing. This is where the insurance piece pops in, Al. And so let's see if this one actually went all the way through. Okay, so I set this up last night to where we could easily pop into each, and for some reason the offer to purchase decided to halfway down disappear. So I always got to have a plan B. So buyer possession before closing agreement. What ended up changing here is they, of course, changed the paragraph. So when we changed information in the contract, it needed to also reflect here. It wasn't in paragraph 13 anymore. It's in paragraph 12 for the rent piece. Okay, I also just got another update before we move on. Candy LaMonica mentioned for agents with less experience in foreclosures, you might want to remind them that a different contract might be required by the seller, which will stipulate that the buyer has to turn on the utilities and pay for them in order to conduct inspections. That is very true. If you get an addendum, a lot of times it's not necessarily a contract. it's an addendum, or it could be a contract, and it's going to spell out things that are going to supersede what's in the contract. So if you do have a foreclosure and they have a list of items, be very careful to look to see what it says regarding whose responsibility it is for utilities. Good point, Sandy, or Candy, thank you. So the main difference on the buyer possession before closing and the seller possession after is insurance. We've always had it state that the other side was going to indemnify the other party if anything happened to their possessions or to the property. And so what it's doing now is confirming that you have to have insurance. So here in number 8, it says buyer shall keep any personal property owned by buyer or in the property insured for the benefit of the buyer in such amount and to such extent as buyer determines desirable. Well, now they've clarified that. They struck that out and said buyer shall procure and maintain throughout the term of the renter's insurance policy and shall promptly provide seller evidence of such insurance upon seller's request. So it doesn't say you have to give it to it. It says if the seller asks for it, you're giving it. In addition to coverage for damage or loss to buyer's personal property in such amount as buyer may determine, the policy shall include adequate coverage for bodily injury and property damage for which buyer may be liable. And so this bodily injury and property damage goes back to our contract because it says in paragraph 9 that they're going to indemnify and hold harmless the other side. And so this just gives the funding to make that happen. Because if the buyer doesn't have insurance for them, how are they going to pay for it? And then it just adds in here on the insurance on seller's property that they not only have to have fire and hazard, but they also need to have liability now and ensure adequacy. So it's making sure that you're contacting your insurance company and you're taking the proper steps. So we pop over to this. So basically, I've gone through the buyer possession. The seller possession is the exact same. It's just the reverse process. And so it's basically saying that the seller must maintain a renter's insurance just like the buyer side because now they're flipping sides. Any questions? So I wanted to touch on vacation rental. And there is a new piece in vacation rental. And I'm sure a lot of us don't even think about vacation rental, but at the beach and in the mountains, vacation rental is happening every day. And so I wanted to be sure to touch on this new piece. They've added something under additional vacation rentals, because as we all know, leases go with the property. So there's a new line that says seller may enter into additional vacation rental agreements after the effective date of this contract, provided that such agreements shall end no later than the settlement date of this contract. So it's giving them the opportunity, if it's an extended period, to still get in a few rentals as long as they're done by the time of closing. But you've also got a myriad of other options here. This is just a new one, reminding everyone that that's a possibility. Does anyone in here do vacation rentals? Any questions on that one? Okay. So on this one, the real estate closing information form, how many people use this form? Okay, I have not seen a whole lot of people use this form because sellers usually, or attorneys usually have their own information sheet. And they have a lot more information going on just this. But there's one change on it, and it's basically taking out the loan information. And if you're using this form, you need to be using an encrypted system because you don't want to be sharing personal information and have it hacked. And we had the wire fraud piece that happened, but people are always trying to find new ways to hack into information. So the less information that you can have regarding your clients and transfer it through your email system, the better, because I would imagine the majority of you don't have an encrypted system. So picking up the phone and having conversations and letting the attorney go through the process with their encryptions is the safest for you and for your client. But this form just took out that piece and basically was taking out any reference to social security numbers or anything like that. And then in all of the forms 2A, 1T, and beyond, they've changed the formatting for consistency and clarity as to how you sign. And it just, if you go to the bottom of those forms, I'm not going to go through all of them, it's very easy now to see where people sign, because a lot of times it might be in a format where you have their name and then you have something and then they're signing below, or every form had a different variation as to how you could sign. And what they've been doing is streamlining so that it's very easy to see where you're going to sign, and if you're a corporation, how you're going to sign. And so that's just a quick note to note that the forms are doing that. I've also noticed some of the forms are populating better where you have date and signatures popping out as well, so that it's easy to see where. Any questions on these before we move on to exclusive right to sell listing agreement? So on the exclusive right to sell listing agreement, there have been a lot of questions regarding estates and how to handle estates. And it's interesting what they did. They just put another big blue box with a note out there. How many of you like all these notes that you share with your clients these days? It seems like the last 2 or 3 years, we're going to have more big blue boxes and red outlines on our contract and make them another 10 pages. It seems like when some of us started, there were 2 to 5 pages, and then it went 5 to 7 pages, 8 to 10, and now with all these boxes, which are great reminders, we're getting closer to 15 pages. How many, Scott?
2.
2. And was that 27 or 29 years ago?
We had one and a lot of carbon paper.
We had 2 in carbon paper.
I love listening to Scott's stories here lately. So this is basically, the bottom line is, if someone is deceased, you need to talk to the attorney to figure out who needs to sign the listing agreement. If someone is married but they tell you that they don't own the property with their spouse, and they had a prenuptial agreement or any type of agreement, that you need the attorney to tell you how to fill out that form. And so we'll walk through this. And with a corporation, you need to be knowing who the member is. And this is common sense, but it's something that comes up all the time, because it's not every day, for the most part, that we are dealing with estates, married people who say that their spouse doesn't need to sign, or a lot of times occasionally. And then also corporate group selling. And as we've had a lot of flippers start to incorporate and a lot of groups incorporate, it's important that we know how to look at the signatures and that we get the right signatures on our documents, because this is a legal and binding document. We want to make sure when we get to the offer, we know who should be on that document definitely. So it's basically saying here, if the property was most recently owned by a person who is now deceased, the tax listing or last recorded deed to the property may not accurately identify the parties who should be named as seller. In such a case, the deceased owner's will or applicable North Carolina law, if the deceased owner died without a will determine the correct party or parties to sign this agreement. Advice from a North Carolina attorney should be obtained concerning the proper parties prior to completing this agreement. So that means that you shouldn't just willy-nilly decide who's going to sign on the day. If you don't know, you need to stop and find out. I know we all are moving in a world that everyone wants everything done immediately, but you'd rather know for certain who should be on this document, as opposed to learn later on that there were 5 sisters and 2 brother-in-laws and 3 daughters that should be on this form. So get your facts up front so that you do it once, as opposed to run around later and don't look like the professionals that we all are. If the owner of the property is a corporation, limited liability company, trust, or other legal entity, the entity should be named as seller, and a duly authorized officer, manager, trustee, or other legal representative of the entity should sign this agreement on the entity's behalf. There should always be an agreement or documentation that someone can provide to show you who is allowed to sign and who is a member. That's just part of how corporations and how partnerships are set up in the state of North Carolina and throughout the country, really. The part that I love best is that a non-owner spouse should be named as seller, because he or she will be required in most cases to sign the deed or release certain marital rights in the property. If a married owner has signed and recorded a prenuptial agreement, a postnuptial agreement, or a free trader agreement, which is typically what someone will do in the separation process, consult a North Carolina attorney to determine whether the non-owner spouse will be required to sign the deed. That's an important one, because a lot of times in North Carolina, you'll have someone say, well, I bought this house prior to the time I was married. Well, that doesn't matter in North Carolina. In South Carolina, it's a little bit easier. So you've got to make sure you have the proper documents so that you know who should be signing. The biggest issue I think comes up right now is when people are getting divorced and they say they have a separation agreement or they've gone through the process. You need to know if the deed was never changed, how that affects you. So you need to talk to an attorney or have a document that tells you what is or is not relative to that. Someone telling you something, you can't just take someone's word for it because they might not know for sure, or they could be being deceitful and you don't want to be tied up into something like that. Any questions there or comments? Okay, as we move down the exclusive right list. Seven C clears up when we all get our commissions. When's the last time an attorney gave you a commission before they actually recorded? I imagine never. Evidently, some,
South Carolina.
well, in South Carolina, yes, but in North Carolina, they wanted to clarify, instead of closing on the property, our fee is due and payable at the distribution of proceeds from sale of the property by the closing attorney. I guess there was a group of us going out there saying that based on this line here, closing on the property, that we should be getting our checks a little bit quicker than we are. Well, everyone's agreed that it's when everything else is dispersed. Unfortunately, we're not as special as we think we are sometimes. So paragraph 9 is just basically reminding people and allowing us to share information. So there are certain cases where our MLSs will require us to provide a listing agreement or has questions if there is some type of complaint against us, or we need to share information because we're withholding a listing from the MLS, or we're doing anything like that. So it's basically put into this piece in page 4 here that seller acknowledges that the rules of any listing service of which firm is a member, which we all have to be a member of such, or in any firm's agents participate, may obligate firm to provide a copy of this agreement to any such listing service as it requests, and seller consents to firm providing a copy to it. So we've always been required to do it, but it never said in this document that we could actually do that. And we're sharing confidential and personal information. And so that is where this is protecting us when we are asked to share information with our MLS. It doesn't happen often. And when it does happen, it's not something we want to have happen. So we want to have a clear process there. Any questions on that? Moving down to 10D. Basically, it is just revising some wording because I know we've all had the question from our buyers of property or sellers when we take the property off the market and it doesn't sell. Why is our stuff still on the internet? Well, can't you get it off? And that comes up all the time. This is just, again, and if we look at the seller acknowledgement, we really should probably read it so that you know what it says, because it comes up a lot. And some of you might have read it and know it by heart, but I bet others of you haven't even paid attention to some of the changes over the last couple of years. And so seller's acknowledgement, they're basically saying seller acknowledges and understands that while the marketing services selected above will facilitate the showing and sale of the property, there are risks associated with allowing access to and disseminating information about the property that are not within the reasonable control of the firm, including but not limited to. I love that, reasonable control of the firm. Unauthorized use of the lockbox and key. It's pretty safe, but someone could bash it and open it to some degree. Control of visitors during or after a showing or an open house, including the taking and use of photographs and videos of the property. Inappropriate use of information about the property placed on the internet or furnished to any listing service in which the firm participates. And finally, what's new this year, it says information about the property placed on the internet by or through any listing service in which the firm participates, which is inaccurate or dated, or information about the property which may remain on the internet following the expiration date, including but not limited to photographs. So there are some places where it is uploaded that once it's out there, it's not coming back. There's no act of Congress that can bring it back today. And so that's something that I think a lot of us have had sellers say, all of a sudden all the pictures are wrong, or I get occasionally on Zillow, a client call and say, what happened to my pictures? Well, Zillow did an update and now all the pictures from 5 years ago when it sold are now on the house, and you've got to go back and figure out how to switch it around. This is just reminding them, and it might be a good point to bring up occasionally because it's something that I think all of us have probably had that call on and going, what am I going to do now? They are agreeing to it here. So then in the signature section, we have, actually this goes down. So it also is continuing here saying seller acknowledges and understands that neither firm nor its agents have control over the information about the property that has been placed on the internet in connection with the marketing of the property for sale, whether by or through a listing service or otherwise, including but not limited to photographs, and that any such information will not be removed. We can't guarantee, we can always work on something to find a solution, but you can never guarantee with the internet that the pictures aren't going to be out there for a lifetime once they're posted. Any questions regarding that? So as we come down to the bottom, I was just going to show you, now you clearly have seller, print name, signature, date, and in order that people will understand where you won't have to keep talking through the process. And then the entity information is separate. And then the firm piece is separate. What you might notice here is now the firm license number is a part of it. So all of a sudden that's popping up. If you have templates, you might want to go back in and check on your templates and get that updated so you don't have to constantly key it in. Doing the template one time for the different new updates will save you a ton of time long term. And if you're not using templates today, I strongly recommend having a buyer set, a seller set, so that you can easily go through that process. Okay, so again, as you have the land and lot offer to purchase, and you've got the exclusive right to sell vacant land here. Then we move into the exclusive buyer agency agreement. So on this form, they basically at the top of the page, it's basically just corresponding to everything else out there. So we will go down to 4D. It's basically, again, clarifying what we had in the previous document on when a buyer's agent is due their money. And it's at the distribution of proceeds from the sale of the property by the closing attorney, which I think we can all agree that's what we expect anyway. So then we get down to F. There are instances when a buyer is purchasing vacant land for a house to be built. And in that case, you may be getting a referral fee for the actual building of the house and what the cost of the house is going to be. This is just clarifying that you need to be sharing that information with your buyer. And that's something that a lot of us are starting to do, where there's vacant land and there's a house to be built on it. So going through that process, it clarifies here and adds F. If buyer purchases an unimproved property, agent may assist buyer in identifying a contractor to make improvements on the property, subject to the provisions of paragraph 10. And buyer acknowledges and understands that in such a case, the contractor may offer to compensate agent. Agent shall disclose to buyer the existence of such an offer for compensation before buyer enters into a contract with a contractor. And buyer hereby consents to the receipt of by agent of any such compensation. So it's basically clarifying that you're going to be getting money that might not be tied specifically to the sale of the property, and that you're going to have money coming to you that the buyer needs to be aware of. Any questions there or concerns? So now we move on to 18. And very easy. And none of us probably would have ever noticed the use of is removed. Not a big deal. And then again, we've got the buyer acknowledges and understands that the firm is talking about the internet and reminding them, once you move into this house, I don't have control over taking all the pictures down. And that becomes an issue sometimes from a privacy standpoint of people not wanting the pictures still posted. You could remove them from MLS, but that doesn't mean they're going away anywhere else. And then they just made it nice and concise here with the entity, and then again, your license number. Okay, so the non-exclusive buyer agency, I'm not going to go through that because I don't think most of us use a non-exclusive buyer agency. But what I will say is on the non-exclusive buyer agency, it basically makes the same changes as the exclusive buyer agency agreement. Any questions there? So how many people use the seller's estimated net sheet that is online?
It's starting to use.
Okay. I have my own version of it, but I like this form. One of the things that they did is they thought it was confusing to say $2 per thousand, and so they switched it to $1 per 500.
They serve a purpose.
So, I mean, it's the same exact thing. We haven't changed how it's calculated. It's just clarifying so that people can do a little bit easier math. Response to buyer's offer. It's a lot of yellow on this one. How many people actually use the response to buyer's offer form? This one is a great form when you look at it in its piece. So again, they decided to scream at you, this is not a counter offer in it, with the bold print here. And they changed from dated to offer date, so it's clearer at the top. And again, this property is used, you can reject an offer and still state what you would be willing to consider, but they also felt like we needed to clarify what that actually means. Because a lot of times I think people were taking this and saying, oh, if I agree to this, they're going to accept my offer. That's not the case. So it basically clarifies here, if the above changes are acceptable to you, please submit another offer with the noted changes. So it says submit another offer, not sign this form and we have a deal. So it is further understood as removed to in bold, please understand, screaming at you, that until an offer has been accepted, we are free to consider and may at any time accept any other offers to purchase presented that contain terms and conditions satisfactory to us at our sole discretion. So this is just further clarifying. But then we have a whole new section here that is added. And this section says, thank you very much for your offer to purchase the above property. Please be advised that we intend to consider all offers on property received by date and time. So if you have multiple offers, this would be a way to communicate that you do plan on considering things at a certain date and time. Well, a lot of times when you say you're going to consider something by a date and time, everyone thinks you're waiting for them to make a decision. And then the next thing you know, your seller says, we're going to go ahead and take this offer over here. We're not going to wait. Well, the seller has no obligation to wait, and that's what this clarified here. And so it says, should you choose to submit another offer, we encourage you to submit your best offer as soon as possible and in no event later than the date and time set forth in the preceding sentence. If you neither submit another offer nor withdraw your current offer, we will consider your current offer along with the other offers. However, and this is all screaming at us again, please understand that we may, in our sole discretion, choose to accept any offer, including yours, prior to the date and time set forth above, or we may choose not to accept any offer submitted by the date and time set forth above. So this is reminding buyers, and this is, I think, something that we should use more often, that they've got to be quick and they've got to make decisions in these cases. And even if they are quick and make decisions, that doesn't mean that the seller has to accept them. It could mean that the seller just goes on and keeps the house on the market. Just because you're in a multiple offer situation doesn't mean that you have to accept anything. And just because you're in a multiple offer situation doesn't mean that the seller has to wait until the date and time specified. They have the ability to sign or do whatever they want. And of course, if something is signed and communicated, it's a contract.
Was there any talk about the original contract written? That is actually signed by the buyer and presented to the seller. Okay, so you have a body of work that is an offer to purchase with signatures on it.
Mhm.
That memo goes.
Mhm.
No changes are made. 2 days later, the seller signs the original document.
Mhm.
Did it have any discussion on that?
There's no discussion on that.
Because then there's a contract, correct?
There is, so it's saying
With the
here,
original terms.
right, but here it actually says in this document that if you do not withdraw your current offer, so there's the
Exactly.
checkbox here, so you've got that checkbox, so it's
That's why
saying,
the buyers need to be told, if they go ahead and sign this baby, we've got a deal. We're not, unless we withdraw it.
well,
Right.
yes, so if the buyers have sent over a signed offer and then down the road the seller decides to sign it, unless it's withdrawn by the buyer prior to or rejected by the seller, then you have a deal.
They're on the contract.
So that's a good point, Al, of making sure that if your buyer doesn't want to be in a multiple offer situation and they want to back out, that you withdraw the offer in writing, that you don't just leave it hanging out there, because if they decide they are moving on to buy another house, not waiting for the multiple offers, and all of a sudden you get this accepted contract in your box,
And
Gotta
that needs
deal
to
with
be
that.
clearly communicated to the buyer. It really does.
And is that done with a form or just a communication that you, like an email? To withdraw?
you can do either, a written communication.
This is less like Vegas.
And so here again, we then now have where you're putting your name in, and it's just clarifying how entities are set up. Any questions on the response to buyer? Okay. So the next piece are the notice to buyer piece and the notice to seller piece. And what we're going to do is pop back over to, is it closed? Okay, so So the first one we're going to look at is the 350T.
You said we'll get a copy of that document. Do we have anywhere to download it?
The 350T
Just, I guess, outline of,
of this.
yeah, the
Oh,
discussion.
everyone behind you actually already has a copy.
There we go. Thank you. No, you're fine. That's okay.
Sorry about that, I didn't know.
I'm paying more attention like that.
Okay. So as we go into the 350T, basically the third checkbox was modified, and we're going to go through each of these, but the third checkbox is basically says see paragraph 11, as opposed to it was 11 and 12, because that's the risk of loss piece. But let's just look at this. The notice to seller that buyer exercises unilateral right to terminate the offer to purchase. So reasons why, again, are the non-receipt of a signed copy of the North Carolina residential property disclosure prior to the signing of the contract based on 5D. Then you've got exercise buyer right to terminate during the due diligence period, which we see quite often. Then this is the property is not in substantially the same or better condition at closing as on the date of this offer, reasonable wear and tear accepted. So that if there is a storm or something happens, that is one of the rights of the buyer.
Would the buyer get any of their monies back in such situation, earnest money and due diligence?
They should likely get their earnest money back in that situation.
Not
But other funds, that would be something that would have to be negotiated. Seller's delay in settlement and closing beyond the time permitted under the contract. Exercise by buyer of right to terminate under paragraph 10 of the backup contract addendum prior to receipt of the buyer of written notice from seller that backup contract has become primary. And then exercise by right to terminate under paragraph 4 relative to short sale addendum. And then you've also got the FHA VA addendum buyer right to terminate here. And the only change here, again, was the 6th and 7th boxes were removed because there was contingency pieces here. And then the 11 and 12 was just modified into 11. So no other changes there. Any questions on the unilateral? So in the 351, or 352, 351 is just the vacant land piece of it. 352 is the one for sellers. And so the notice to the buyer that the seller is exercising their unilateral right to terminate. And on this one, the main changes is the 11 and 12 as well in the fourth checkbox. So it's basically rearranging that. And it also is eliminating the contingent sale piece. One thing I wanted to comment here is we've seen a lot more activity over the last year of the due diligence money and the earnest money never showing up after you have a signed contract. And when you do, everyone always calls, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? Really? It's the seller's unilateral right to terminate the contract. And it's basically buyer's failure to timely deliver the due diligence fee or initial earnest money by cash, official, bank check, wire transfer, or electronic transfer following written notice to seller. And that is pretty much what you have. Unfortunately, everyone wants money, but there's not usually it forthcoming. You can push for it, but.
So I now have one situation where, I mean, the offer reads that the due diligence is supposed to be delivered at contract formation. But if you have an out-of-town buyer or whichever, and only one seller ever that got real crazy about how it was not delivered literally the second we went under contract. So what is timely?
Timely is.
Because, I mean, things being sent right after contract's formed, if it's in the mail, if I have a client, like a client I had in Ohio, where it was gonna take 2 to 4 days or even if they overnighted it, it's still a day and a half, 2 days, that's not technically following what the contract says.
The preference would be to have it in hand to be able to deliver
But then
at the time of contract.
But then we're supposed to walk around with a blank check from our clients. That's where I think it's kind of written weird and in a really difficult way to follow an offer to purchase, but I'm curious as to.
I would not
I always
walk
want to
away.
protect my buyer.
Please do not. Yes. Well, no,
Well,
not
that's
for due
earnest
diligence.
money.
That's
So
earnest money.
earnest money's a lot easier because you have that time frame, but due diligence, it says it's supposed to deliver at contract formation.
So for those of you who are out there, what ends up happening with the due diligence is oftentimes you have out-of-town buyers who are already home before the contract is signed off on. If you know who you're going to be writing the offer to, I'd go ahead and have them write that money before they leave. If not, you can also have it held at the office in one of our lock boxes until you need to utilize it, would be a source as opposed to carrying it around with you. The other piece is I would try hard not to have someone put a due diligence check in the mail, because I can't tell you how many times due diligence or earnest money checks get lost in the mail. And chasing those overnight is what I would have as a second option. Because overnight, you know, you have a tracking number, you know when it's going to get there, you can track it. Putting it in the mail, if you're in Ohio, it could be here tomorrow, it could be here 10 days from tomorrow. And so you want to make sure that you're protecting your seller. And the last thing you want to do is have the seller sitting out there with no due diligence fee, because they can call this. It could be in the mail, but it's not in their hand.
Yeah.
And so your buyer needs to spend that extra money to make it overnight as opposed to it be just in the mail.
I know what he's saying though. You get an analytical or real stickler. The way it's worded, you can't actually perform the way it's worded sometimes.
Yeah,
Right.
unless you're standing in front of each other
That's true.
with a checkbook.
Well, it says by the effective date.
Yeah.
So that could be after 12 midnight on the effective date.
Yeah.
So that could be at that second.
Again, I've had times where I sold a house to somebody by FaceTime with them in a different state, so
Yeah, I was just looking at.
they're never around, they're not there, so I see that as
Sometime
a
on
challenge
that
to
effective
keep.
date is the last.
And I've only had one time where an agent's really got crazy.
And
Question.
yes,
Can an agent hold the signed contract hostage, the listing agent hold the contract hostage until the due diligence is received?
technically they cannot, because it says that you have a contract once it's signed. And our MLS rules require you to change the status once you have a signed contract. It doesn't say anything about the due diligence money.
they won't hand over a signed contract until they have the due diligence in hand and won't change anything, that they'll hold it. Lock it
I mean, that is their prerogative
in. Is it?
I mean, if they've communicated to you, then
Nope,
you,
they did not.
so if they haven't communicated to you, then you don't have a contract.
Okay, so
Because
they
it could be
can hold it
communicated,
hostage.
yes, it could technically be communicated to you but not delivered, and you still have a contract.
They have a signed contract, but they won't hand it over until they have due diligence. Is that something that they can do?
You know, it's
And we know it's signed.
Yes. I mean, there's nothing you can do to force them to give you the contract.
Right.
But it is something that agents will do if they've been burned on the due diligence side of things. Because what they don't want to do is change the status in MLS to under contract, and then 5 days later have to change it back and explain to all these buyers in the time off the market that we never got our due diligence money. That's why we went back on the market, because no one's ever going to believe them half the time. They're going to think an inspection went wrong or something happened. So they're trying to protect their client, but they should technically, once it is signed and communicated, you are under contract, and the status should be changing in MLS. Yes, we definitely don't live in a perfect world, so you're going to have all of the one-off scenarios that happen. Any questions regarding the notice to buyer that seller is exercising their right to unilaterally terminate? As we move through these, the next one we're going to move to is notice to buyer to deliver official bank check wire or electric wire transfer 355T. Basically, the name on the form, and the second and third bullets, and paragraph 3 amended to conform word changing. This is basically just making a few changes relative to immediately available funds. And that was 355T. So in this one, we have paragraph 4. It says paragraph 4. I'm sorry, I'm looking at the wrong one. So in this one, it's paragraph 1. And so basically, this is just changed to say in the second and third bullets, and paragraph 3 to conform word changes. So it's basically saying if buyer fails to deliver either due diligence fee or any initial earnest money deposit by their due dates, or shall any check or other funds paid by buyer be dishonored for any reason by the institution upon which the payment is drawn, buyer shall have 1 banking day after written notice to deliver cash, official bank check, wire transfer, or electronic transfer to payee. So it's basically just clarifying here again the types of ways you can take money. And then it also says in the event the buyer does not timely deliver cash, official bank check, wire transfer, or electronic funds transfer, sellers will have the right to terminate the contract upon written notice to buyer. So that's a unilateral notice. And in paragraph 3, it says seller hereby demands that buyer deliver cash, official bank check, wire transfer, or electronic transfer to the payee and payment of the above referenced items no later than 1 banking day following this notice. So you do have to give notice, and this is the form that you utilize to give notice. So if you don't get your money, this is what you use before you can send that unilateral termination. Yes.
Which one is this we're talking about again? Sorry.
Sorry, this is 355T.
Thank you.
You gotta give them that one extra day.
Yes, you do.
Yes.
Yes. It's just a clarification here of immediately available funds and what that means. Any questions there? And then the termination of contract by mutual consent with release of earnest money deposit. Excuse me, which is 390T. These are the forms we never want to see or think about. So as we go to paragraph 4 here, it basically is just clarifying, occasionally the parties' agreements to terminate by mutual consent may include the payment of an amount in addition to the EMD. So if there's a mutual termination, but you're going to give back some due diligence, or you're going to give back something so that you can sign and get out of it, this is where you do that. So number 4, deposit other amounts. It says the parties agree that the deposit shall be dispersed by the escrow agent in the following manner. And if the other amounts or any other consideration is to be paid in connection with the termination of the contract, such amount consideration is as follows. So it's allowing you to add more information here if you're going to be doing anything beyond just the earnest money release. And it's basically simplifying. So paragraphs 3 and 4 in the existing version of the form are basically being reformatted into this version to keep this a one-pager. And then the final piece is the professional services disclosure. Home re-inspections was added to the list. I'm not going to pull it up, but note that home re-inspections, so you can have them select or waive that. And so make sure that you're aware of that and that you're using the professional services disclosure form. Any questions on that?
I have a question. Back to the wire transfer. Chip seems to be, sort of antiquated at this point. So where are we going with wiring and the transferring of monies? I mean, with Remax, couldn't somebody just wire their EMD here as opposed to us carrying around checks? I mean, most of the firms now won't even give copies of the checks, which I think is a great policy. Right. And that's what we use page now 14 for that.
Right.
But we're just antiquated here. So you see where we're going with this?
Yes, I think that we will start seeing in our forms some changes over the next year or so, that they're starting to talk about Zelle and Venmo and other PayPal methods of transferring money. And as Remax executives, we will be looking at different options as well as the market changes as to how people send funds. We've all got to look at what makes sense. As of right now, we're still taking the checks and wire transfers can happen on occasion, but it's making sure that we're protecting our clients in the process. And with so much wire fund hacking, everyone is being very cautious as to the steps they take in that direction. Any other questions regarding these documents? I have a couple of other things I wanted to share with you before we get our lunch. So from a legal hotline standpoint, do you guys know that we have a legal hotline that is free in North Carolina that lawyers answer? And we have a tech helpline. And when we say tech helpline, that means anything. So if you have a problem with your desktop, your laptop, your tablet, your smartphone, you can call our tech helpline at no cost. And that is through the North Carolina Realtor Association. That is a benefit to you that you can utilize. I don't think a lot of people know about it, so I just wanted to share that with you. And then the other piece that I added in here is throughout the year, we get a lot of pieces that are sharing information on handling multiple offers. And with handling multiple offers,
We needed that number.
oh, sorry, got it?
Anybody read that individually?
The legal hotline,
Yes, okay.
336-294-1415.
Thank you.
And the tech is 877-573-5612.
Thank you.
Of course.
Everybody got it? Okay. So also Sandy mentioned as part of the requirements that not only is it the Realtor Association, Remax Executive, it's also lenders and what they will accept. So as we move through this process of accepting different types of electronic transfers, we've also got to figure out what lenders are willing to accept and what the FDIC will allow to be accepted as part of the transaction. So it's a large group of people that all.
Well, I would imagine as long as they can prove that there's coming out of one account and going into another, they can clearly see that.
It
Wells
is,
Fargo,
but-
Orange, Golden, Zelle.
With every change and modification, particularly in our time of wire fraud, we just want to make sure that process and the steps are taken to where all lenders will take it, the FDIC is comfortable with it, and the lawyers and the Realtors Association all are on board. So it takes a little time to get everybody moving in the same direction on something like that, and making sure we're safeguarding our clients and all of us in the same standpoint. So popping over here, when I was out on the site, I saw this, and I don't know how many of you, when you get information on legal quizzes or look at the realtor book, a magazine that comes out, or Insight, there's always interesting pieces, and I just wanted to make sure that you had a copy of it. So those that are listening online, we sent you the legal quiz on handling multiple offers, and then I handed it out here today. But some of the pieces I think that we need to key in on are when you can share you have multiple offers. And one of the pieces here is I multiple times here in the last 6 months have called an agent and said, do you have multiple offers? Well, you can't tell me you have multiple offers if your seller hasn't given you permission to do so, and I would suggest you get that in writing. And I can't tell you how many times an agent says, oh yeah, and very close at list price, or gives me the actual price. And so you need to be careful when you're working through multiple offers or you're representing your seller, because even if your seller tells you that you can share the price, you can't unless you get the permission of the offerer. And I doubt the offerer is going to give you permission to share what they offered. So you need to be careful as to what the seller is advising you and what you're asking the seller. You can't just assume that you can share all multiple offers, or you can say, oh yeah, we've got multiple offers coming in. Think about what you're saying before you're saying it, because it can easily flow out of your mouth and you wish you could just put it all back in because you never asked the seller, should I share? And so that's something to think about. And I thought this had a lot of good information on it relative to how to handle multiple offers and how to do them appropriately so that no one feels unfairly at the end of it. I mean, we all have that discussion where someone thinks that you share information. Now, the one piece of information that you do have to share, if I ask you, Paul, and I say, is the other offer from someone in your firm? That's a material fact where you have to share that, yes, it is from another person within my firm. So look through this. Let me know if you have any questions. I really just wanted to bring it back to your attention because we're all dealing with multiple offers at different times, and I want to make sure that we're thinking through and remembering, and this is just a good, oh yeah, I completely forgot about that. And then the one that I liked the most here is an offer to purchase becomes binding only after the party to whom the offer is made signs it without any changes, and a signed copy is delivered to the offering party. Is that true or false?
True.
It's false. It says, assuming the offer itself does not require that a signed copy be delivered as a condition of the offer becoming a binding contract. According to the offer and purchase and contract, the offer becomes binding on the effective date, which is defined in 1G as the date that the party to whom the offer or counteroffer is made signs or initials it. And such signing or initialing has been communicated to the offering party. So communicated to. Although delivering a signed copy of an accepted offer certainly constitutes communication of acceptance, it's not required by law, which permits communication and acceptance by any usual means of communication, oral or written. For example, a phone call from the listing agent to the buyer agent confirming that the seller has signed the buyer's offer would constitute acceptance.
So that can be really technical because somebody can say, yeah, they accept your offer, but that doesn't mean that they have signed it.
Yes.
So it's just the communication of actually signing the document that actually makes.
Yeah, that's why you don't want to get ahead of yourself.
Yes. The next question down on the last page of what I handed out also says, buyer agent A submits an offer to listing agent B. After presenting the offer to her client, listing agent B emails buyer agent A to say that seller will accept the buyer's offer if the buyer is willing to increase the purchase price by $10,000. After contacting the buyer, buyer agent A replies to listing agent B's email stating that the buyer accepts the seller's counter offer. The property is under contract. True or false? False. Assuming that buyer A does not have the actual or apparent authority to bind the buyer to a contract, the standard buyer agency agreement does not confer authority on the agent for that authority. So you cannot assume if you have back and forth emails that you've got a signed contract. It's not signed until you know it's signed and it's been communicated that it's signed by the party.
So like she was saying before, where they've actually communicated it is signed, but they're not gonna release a copy until they get due diligence, but they communicated that it's signed.
You're under contract, and that agent should be changing the status in MLS to reflect that it's under contract,
Even if they haven't provided a copy.
even if they haven't provided a copy.
But what if the seller in that situation changes their mind before delivering that contract, even though you've communicated, if the buyer's agent doesn't have any proof that it's signed, I mean,
That becomes a one-off sticky situation where you say, you said it was signed, I want to see the copy. And I didn't mishear you, did I? And then the agent says no. So then you need to show me proof and you need to remind your client of this and go back to the law and point it out.
They have to put it in an email.
Yeah. If you hear something, it's always better to see it in writing.
Yeah.
So a couple of other housekeeping things. We have someone that's going to come in and present for a few minutes, and then we will be served lunch. How many of you guys ever note or see that we have elections for our board of directors for Charlotte Regional Realtor Association and the Carolina MLS? Those come up every fall, and this Monday there was a notice that went out, and I don't know if you noticed or not, but our own Karush is nominated to run for treasurer. And so he will be out there campaigning a little bit, asking for you to go in and vote. It takes just a few minutes once elections open, which is in the beginning of September, to vote. And the reason why he and I and Sandy McAlpine all have been on the board and doing things over the years are to make sure that our voices are heard. And the more that we can support Karush and myself and Sandy as we run for positions, and if you're interested in doing anything at the board or doing any committee work or being nominated next year, let us know. Because the more of us who are active in making the decisions of how MLS is run, how our association is run, and what we do and how we do it, the better off we're going to be long-term as a group at RE/MAX Executive. So we appreciate your support and be looking for videos. I saw a hilarious video that Gina helped Karush create, and we all know how creative Gina is. This one had me cracking up out there this morning at 8:30 when I walked in. He was asking, "What do you think?" And I was like, "They'll remember you." But please remember that it's coming up. And if you have any questions ever about the association or forums, there's a plethora of information out there. And if you need a route to get there, you can always ask me. And if I don't have the answer, I'm always going to go to someone who does, because I don't believe in sharing information I'm not certain of, and I don't know everything. So I appreciate you guys coming in. I'm going to just let Sarah know that we are ready. So give me just a second.
Let's give Tiffany a round of applause.
Alex will be here in just a minute to talk to you about it. In the meantime, is there any other questions or anything that you have or you want me to get answers to that I can do some bomb messages back to you on? Or topics for future classes? Are there any future classes? Guys, we do a lot of different classes and programs here. We have some things coming up at the Valentine office and here, from credit repair to mold and remediation and talking to inspectors. But if there are any topics that you have that we haven't been clear on or you want more information on, shoot me a message, shoot any of us a message so that we can get it on the calendar, because there are so many interesting topics and so many things going on in our market today. We want to make sure that you're the best educated agents out there and that you're a resource to your clients and to even other agents in the market. That's why we will continue to put on things like this to push those. But I think Ally is here. My vision is, and you want to come up with me?
Yeah. I wasn't sure if I should close the door. It's so cold in here.
So where did you last leave off? The sellers, the listing agents needing to provide the prior policies?
No, I have gone all through all of the updates.
Okay.
And so we are ready for you to talk to us about what a listing agent can do to safeguard your real.
Perfect. Well, I want to see if Logan is in here. Well, of course he's not. But Logan brought it to my attention that one of the updates is that the listing agents need to provide, or at least do a little bit more effort in providing the seller's title insurance. And we all know, how good they keep up with the most important documents that they have. So you almost never get it from the seller. One of the things that we can do is we have 2 national databases. So if you can send me just the address, I can look that up, or if you have the contract, that's even easier because it's going to show me the lot, the map booking page, and I can look in both of those databases, and if I find it, I'm going to mark it that it came from us, and then send it back to you. The sooner the better. You're going to look very resourceful because you now have this additional service that you're offering. Even if the buyer is not represented, that's a potential person that you can reach out to later because you're showing them the services that we offer our agents. So I think that can make you look really good in those situations. The other thing I was thinking about as I speak there, if you see that the buyer isn't represented and you just think about shooting us a quick email, I know Gina and Marta started doing that a while back. We've gotten a lot of business that way. I was really pleasantly surprised. I reach out to the law firm and just say, hey, we noticed that, you weren't represented, so that work's not directed. We'd love to work with you. And a lot of the times we were able to secure that business. So I think that's an excellent opportunity if you're heavy on the listing side or just kind of got a mix of both. We can help service your clients, make you look better and smarter. We would really appreciate that effort there. In fact, I was a little late coming down because Steve Onisick had a past client just reach out to him out of the blue. He's not even representing the person to my knowledge and just said, hey, I'm trying to find my prior policy. And I can look and find it and hopefully send it back to him, make him look excellent in that resort.
Is that true in all counties?
Yes, in all counties. So you might be a little confused. The property reports that we do for listing agents will show you like the current owners, any open deeds of trust, and then we have a subscription to the North Carolina judgment system. Union County is the only county, for whatever reason, they won't list their deeds of trust online. I don't know why, but it's such a bummer. But the prior policies, we have national databases with Fidelity, which is very large in all of our footprints, as well as First American. They were pretty prominent several years ago, so if you've got somebody who's been in their home for like a couple of decades, we're most likely going to find it there. But we check both, including ourselves. We've been around 5 or 6 years, so if it's kind of a recent one too, we have that third resource that nobody else has. Like everything in our business, timing is of the essence. So as soon as you have that contract or it looks like it's going that way, just shoot us the copy if that's easier. Just send us the address. It takes us just a little extra step to look up in the county what that lot and map booking page is. But if you just send that over, we actually stop what we're doing because providing this to the attorney's office as soon as possible or right when the contract's delivered, that really secures our business because they're required by the state to go back 30 years or to a policy more recent. So we're giving them what they want. Even if it's not somebody on an approved attorney list, they don't care. They're thrilled. I can't tell you how many times, especially the small practitioners, which is 1 or 2, and they're doing their own work, they come back to me and say, Allie, I cannot tell you how helpful this is. And I'm like, yeah, girl, I know, I used to do it. And so it really kind of opens a good rapport there, a good relationship. So that's a helpful way to get us in the door in some places where we're not, or, well, no, the prior policies goes everywhere. The property reports are the one thing that we can't really help you. And you really want to do that property report. And in my opinion, the best use for your time and resource is before you sign that listing agreement. 9 times out of 10, everything's going to be fine. You're not going to have that unusual circumstance where there's something that you go, This is just not for me. I always love to give this classic example because in 18 years, I've never seen it. But Tanya Cogdell had one, and the same name came up. It's a match, it's the unusual name, but it was a $1.17 million terrorism lien. Nobody knows what it is, but good luck working with the government, figuring that out and getting proper documentation in that, contract period. So she decided to pass on it, and she said, hey team, please do this every time. It's a free resource. So most times you're gonna find out, oh, the ex-husband or ex-spouse or whatever is still on title. Well, you gotta be in communication with them. They're gonna have to sign. Oh, well, I don't know where they're at. Well, you're gonna have to find them. Things like that that are gonna keep you moving along on track. Because most likely the attorney's not gonna order the title search until 3 to 4.
The key is to get that information early so we can fix things or adjust things. Because the attorney usually waits to the end.
Exactly.
And everyone's scrambling and our dates are all messed up. And who
Yeah.
knows, right?
And the reason why they do that, if you're just curious, the attorneys usually wait 3 to 4 weeks before the closing because they're doing one or two things. They themselves are outsourcing and sending their manpower to update, or they're, outsourcing and paying somebody else to do it. But the lenders are cracking down, and every time they go to close their CPO, their closing protection letters, they have to be within a 2-month time frame. So if they order it too far out, then they're having to pay a second person or send their own people out again to do an update before it closes, and then a third or fourth time after it closes. So it just kind of racks up a little bit of an expense for them, but we can do it for you like that. We usually get it back the same business day. We'll acknowledge it immediately, and we'll tell you we'll get it back by X time frame, if not sooner. So you really have nothing to lose. And on the property report, you're just emailing orders@charlottetitle.com. With the exception of Union County, we'll look it up and then we'll shoot it back to you. And you just have a nice, simple 1-page summary, current ownership, open deeds of trust, taxes, any potential same name matches in the judgment system. And on that, you may have some false positives, but you have a good talking tool to say, hey, I was doing some due diligence with my title department. I noticed a couple of things came up that have your same name. Do you know anything about it? And then shut up.
And now,
See how they act.
that's also a really good reason to justify the broker administration fee that we charge.
Exactly.
The work ahead of time that typically is done by attorneys. And as we know, a lot of times the buyer's out of due diligence and there might be a 3-week lapse between due diligence and closing when the title work finally comes in.
Right.
So, that and the insurance clue report, that's the way I justify the BAF to every seller.
Those layers of protection.
Yeah, I think so. That's what I was going to say. It's something that sets our particular, not even just the franchise, but our particular agency apart from all of your competitors. I mean, you just have so many resources that are available to you. It's almost hard to kind of choose and remember how to use them all. But once you get in those habits, the last most important thing I want to remember too is, again, orders@charlottetitle.com. When you are representing the buyer and you're sending that contract to the attorney, copy us. It gives us that little bit of leg up to do the same thing, to secure that business, give that attorney what they're looking for so that they'll return that work, back to us. There's probably more I'm missing or can't think about, but I've been in the industry a good bit. I've worked for front-end mortgage processing, so I've seen how difficult that can be and kind of understand why the lender is yelling at the paralegal who's yelling at you, so I can prioritize our work a little bit better. I've worked in default servicing at Wells Fargo, and a lot of creativity there. So some things, if it just doesn't sound right and you want to just give me a call, I'm a good sounding board for that. I also used to work in permits department, so it's just a little bit of everything. We just have resources that you can either come upstairs or pick up the phone or email me and you can get to me. A lot of times you can't say that same thing, even with our partners. We love our partners and there's lots of activity going on, especially in the peak season. It might be a little hard to get a hold of them and you just think, I don't understand what they're saying. Just give me a call. I'll be happy to talk to them. Yeah, let me go out and get a bunch. And Is lunch being served in here, do we know?
It is across the way in the conference room on the other side of the lobby,
Okay,
and you're welcome to eat in here, but lunch is across the hall. And
okay.
we thank you so much for
I'll
coming.
make sure I have plenty of cards.
Is that orders@charlottetitle.com?
Yes, orders with an S. Multiple people monitor that email. You're welcome to send something directly to me, but a lot of times I'm not at my desk and there might be a little.
And we just send you, say, you know, about to list this address and you'll send us that report, or, yeah, the buyer that's about to buy this address and you'll send us.
Yep, and it's no cost. You were,
I was gonna say this though, I've had sellers as a paralegal that didn't realize that they still had a pending home equity line of credit open on their account. And if we asked Ally to run the judgment search to see what's pending against the property, they would have known about that before closing. And they just, you know, screamed at me like, no, it's closed, no, it's closed. I'm saying, I'm sorry, this is pending. You have to provide that information. This is all things that we as agents, because of our affiliation with or executive title, would be able to get in front of the seller to say, all right, well, so you have one open deed of trust, and they're like, oh, yeah, we do, or no, we closed it out. Well, go ahead and ask your bank for that zero balance letter. Go ahead and close that out. Do what you need to get that clear title for your attorney so you're not held up at the end, because your attorney's gonna say, well, this is on title, show me the paperwork that we're gonna clear it out, and then I'll certify and close. Otherwise, I mean, you're gonna get delayed. So the more your seller knows about themselves, which
it's a perfect example.
they really don't know as much as you would think that they do, just get ahead of the game.
And there are even a lot of situations where banks have changed names and satisfactions never happened.
And they are, especially the big banks, they never report satisfaction.
They're surprised.
So
Getting those solved when you're starting to list as opposed to, and that contract time is huge, because that's often the delayer of closing and no one realizes it. So that is the perfect reason.
Would you guys be able to identify that on the property report, like, hey, this is a potential issue?
well, it's, what it's gonna do, like Al actually had this exact example. It's gonna show that deed of trust, equity line, whatever it's labeled, is still open. The banks have to go in and close it. They're supposed to do it in a certain time frame, and they don't. Nobody pushes the envelope. But it's gonna show open. We're gonna list however many show open, that there's not a satisfaction that relate back to it. And then you're gonna have to go back to the seller and say, hey, this shows open. No, it's not. Yes, it is. Now let's start the process. And what again, with the big banks, it's really hard with acquisitions, banks going out of business. You know, I just kind of worked with him a little bit because I happen to have that experience working for Wells Fargo, big company. You have to talk a certain lingo to help those people do their job, because they don't even know the name of their own archival system and how to ask for the right thing. And sometimes at the end of the day, you can't get it done, but the longer time that you have, the better, because then it's less pressure and frustration on the attorneys. The attorneys have the legal right, if they think there's sufficient evidence that it's been paid off, which is really hard to prove, then they can satisfy the thing. Rarely do. And on this same note, I do want to say this. I have an excellent working relationship with Fidelity. That's who we do most of our underwriting with. And in 18 years, I have never worked with somebody who's so practical. There's something that's called an Alta 34 known risk. So we know this is a deed of trust that's out there by whoever, that's just Nation Bank, whatever. It's long and in existence. We've showed them all that we've tried. We've got all this documentation. But we can't literally get it closed out. Can you work with us? Can you still insure over? Insure over doesn't mean we ignore something. It means we acknowledge it on here, but we're going to still cover it in case this entity suddenly arises and forces you to pay something. So in that instance, it's very common for her to give me the approval on that. So, and again, in 18 years, I've worked for several different companies. They rarely do that. Either they don't know enough about it, or they just don't take enough time like ours does. Any questions? Anyone? Well, you know where to find me. Orders@charlottetitle.com. I monitor that one as well as Ally, ALI, @charlottetitle.com. I'll be happy to answer any questions. Nancy, do you want to stand up and let everybody see you? And she is my favorite addition.
I'm doing the deal right now, and that property search does help, and I'm doing the buying side. And I went ahead and I looked at it, and it told me, they give me the information. Also, it seems, because it's the same name, it had like some judgments against the title. So I called the listing agent, I was like, okay, this looks a little weird, you know, what's going on, even though it's the same name, there's probably a very common name. I'm seeing I'm seeing some judgment. She goes, no, it's clear, we had different look at the title, you know, but he just.
It's a good talking tool, it just makes you look so much smarter than everybody else,
To
and
make sure that we get it closing.
Maybe it wasn't.
She said that she went ahead and looked at the title.
but it, I mean, again, you just look so much smarter than the average bear because you've done this, and it literally just shooting off an email to us and going on about your business, because we won't drop the ball, we'll get it back to you immediately.
Awesome.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
I'll make sure this partner is out here.
Thank you, we report to things really
Good, thank you.
Thank you guys who have been on the call. We are going to end it. Thank you.